Imagine a routine flight turn into a life or death situation. An entire plane, hundreds of lives, and only one person to save them. A 12-year-old boy. This is the sky's youngest hero. What would you do if the fate of everyone on board rested in your hands? Join me as we unravel the extraordinary true story of courage, determination, and a moment that changed everything. The early morning sunlight filtered through the window of a modest home in Austin, Texas. Leonard Thompson, a 12-year-old with unruly brown hair and a perpetual look of curiosity, sat at his desk, completely engrossed in the flickering screen of his flight simulator. The hum of the virtual engines filled the room as he adjusted the controls, maneuvering a Boeing 737 into a perfect descent. Flaps down. Speed at 155 knots, he murmured to himself, his fingers darting across the keyboard. The simulated plane landed smoothly on the digital runway, and Leonard grinned with satisfaction. "Leonard, breakfast." Rachel's voice called from the kitchen. "Coming, Mom," he replied, reluctantly peeling his eyes away from the screen. He shut the simulator down, grabbed a tattered aviation manual from the desk, and hurried downstairs. Rachel, his mother, stood by the stove flipping pancakes. Her warm smile was the kind that reassured Leonard no matter what. "You've been at that simulator since dawn. You're going to wear it out," she teased. Leonard shrugged, pouring syrup over his pancakes. "I need to stay sharp if I want to be a pilot someday. Did you know that the Boeing 737 has over 600 cockpit controls? I've memorized most of them." Rachel chuckled. "You and those planes. You're going to fly them all someday. I just know it." Their conversation paused as Leonard flipped through his manual, his eyes gleaming with excitement. Airplanes weren't just a hobby, they were his passion. Later that afternoon, Rachel arrived home holding an envelope with a wide smile. "Leonard, guess what?" she called out. Leonard dashed to the living room, curious. "What is it?" Rachel handed him the envelope, and he tore it open. Inside was a flight itinerary and a short note. "Congratulations, Leonard. As part of a youth outreach program, you and a guest have been selected to fly to New York City for a special aviation experience. All expenses covered." Leonard's jaw dropped. "No way. Is this real?" Rachel nodded. "Real as it gets. A chance to fly and explore your favorite subject up close." Excitement coursed through him. "We're really flying? On an actual plane?" "Yes, and we leave next week. But promise me you'll stay calm during the flight, okay?" Rachel said with a smile, though she couldn't help but feel a twinge of apprehension about the journey. "I promise. This is the best day ever," Leonard exclaimed, clutching the envelope as if it were a golden ticket. For the rest of the day, Leonard couldn't stop talking about the upcoming trip. He researched the airline, the model of the plane they'd be flying, and even the layout of the airport. Every detail mattered to him. As the week went on, his anticipation grew. On the night before the flight, Leonard lay awake in bed, staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars on his ceiling. His mind raced with thoughts of the adventure ahead. "This is it," he whispered to himself. "The start of something amazing." The morning air was crisp as Leonard and Rachel arrived at Austin Bergstrom International Airport. The terminal buzzed with activity. Passengers rushing to gates, announcements echoing overhead, and luggage wheels clattering on polished floors. Leonard's eyes lit up as he scanned the bustling scene. He clutched his small backpack, adorned with aviation stickers, and a dog-eared manual peeking out from the top. "Mom, look at that. A 737 MAX 8. And over there, that's an Airbus A321. Rachel chuckled at his excitement. "You've barely stepped inside, and you're already naming planes like they're old friends." "They are old friends," Leonard said, grinning. They checked in and passed through security, with Leonard marveling at every step of the process. When they reached the terminal, he pressed his face against the massive glass windows, watching as ground crews prepared planes for takeoff. "Do you think I'll get a window seat?" he asked eagerly. "I'm sure you will," Rachel replied, adjusting her carry-on bag. A voice came over the intercom, announcing their flight's boarding. Leonard grabbed his mother's hand, practically pulling her toward the gate. As they approached the plane, Leonard whispered, "I hope we get to see the cockpit." As they stepped onto the plane, Leonard's excitement only grew. He peered down the narrow aisle, taking in the details. The overhead compartments, the rows of leather seats, and the faint scent of coffee lingering in the air. "Good morning." A cheerful flight attendant greeted them. "Good morning. Is this a 737 to 800? Leonard asked enthusiastically. The attendant blinked, momentarily surprised, before smiling. "It sure is. You must really love planes." Leonard nodded, his grin widening. They settled into their seats, Leonard by the window, of course. As he gazed out, watching the ground crew load luggage, a voice interrupted his thoughts. "You really know your planes, don't you?" Leonard turned to see a man seated across the aisle. He was in his late 40s, wearing a tailored suit and an expensive watch. His gray-streaked hair and confident demeanor made him seem larger than life. Leonard nodded shyly. "I've been studying them since I was 6. The man chuckled. "Impressive. I'm Benjamin Caldwell." He extended a hand. Leonard hesitated but shook it. Leonard Thompson. "Nice to meet you, Leonard. I own a few private jets myself. Maybe one day you'll fly one of them," Benjamin said with a wink. Rachel leaned over with a polite smile. "That's very kind of you to say. He's been dreaming of flying since he was little." "Well, it sounds like he's got the passion for it," Benjamin replied. "Passion is half the battle." Leonard's cheeks flushed with pride. The idea of flying a jet owned by someone like Benjamin seemed impossible but thrilling. As the plane taxied to the runway, Leonard exchanged glances with Benjamin. It was clear this was going to be a flight neither of them would forget. The plane hummed with anticipation as Leonard settled into his window seat, his eyes darting to the wing outside. He watched as the mechanics finished their checks, the ground crew waved, and the engines roared to life. "This is incredible," Leonard whispered, his fingers lightly touching the armrest as if it were part of the controls. Rachel adjusted her seatbelt beside him. "Don't forget to breathe, Leo," she teased, noticing how intently he was studying the plane's movements. Across the aisle, Benjamin Caldwell leaned back in his seat, observing Leonard with a mixture of amusement and admiration. "You know, kid, that kind of focus could take you places," he said. Leonard turned to him, grinning. "I'm trying to memorize everything. Did you know the thrust of these engines can reach up to 24,000 pounds? Benjamin chuckled. "Can't say I knew that, but now I do." As the plane began to taxi, Leonard's heart raced with excitement. The rumbling vibrations under his feet felt like a promise of adventure. When the engines roared louder and the plane accelerated down the runway, he leaned forward slightly, pressing his face against the window. The nose lifted, and Leonard gasped as the ground fell away. Below, the city shrank into a grid of buildings and roads, and above, the sky opened into a vast expanse of blue. "Everything looks so small," Rachel said, glancing out the window. Leonard nodded, his voice soft with awe. "It's like we're part of the clouds." Once the plane reached cruising altitude, the seatbelt signs dimmed and the hum of conversation filled the cabin. Leonard couldn't resist stealing glances at the cockpit door, wishing he could see what the pilots were doing. A flight attendant approached with a cart, offering drinks and snacks. When she reached their row, Leonard hesitated before speaking. "Excuse me, can I ask a question?" The attendant smiled. "Of course. What's our altitude right now?" She raised an eyebrow, clearly impressed by the unusual question. "We're at 35,000 feet. Are you interested in aviation?" Leonard nodded enthusiastically. "I study planes all the time. I know about autopilot, navigation systems, and even how to read some of the instruments." "Well, aren't you impressive?" she said with a laugh. "Keep it up, and maybe you'll be flying one of these someday." Leonard smiled, taking her words as encouragement. She handed him a small set of wings, a gift for young aviation enthusiasts, which he tucked into his backpack like a trophy. As the flight continued, Leonard couldn't stop watching the plane's wings. He pointed out details to Rachel and Benjamin, from the movement of the flaps to the faint contrails left behind in the sky. "You really see the world differently, don't you?" Benjamin said, leaning over. Leonard shrugged, his gaze still on the window. "I just think everything up here has a purpose. Everything matters." Benjamin smiled, nodding. "You're absolutely right, Leonard. Everything matters." For a moment, Leonard felt like he belonged, like the sky was exactly where he was meant to be. The plane cruised smoothly over the sprawling patchwork of clouds, with sunlight streaming through the windows. Leonard was engrossed in watching the wing, tracing its movements as the flaps adjusted subtly. Rachel was flipping through an in-flight magazine, while Benjamin worked on his tablet. Suddenly, a faint jolt rippled through the cabin. Leonard immediately noticed. His eyes darted to the wing, which trembled slightly. "That's odd," he muttered to himself. Rachel looked up, sensing his unease. "What is it, Leo?" "Just turbulence, I think," he replied, though his tone was cautious. The captain's voice came over the intercom, calm and reassuring. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some mild turbulence. Please fasten your seatbelts. Everything is under control." Passengers exchanged glances, buckling up as instructed. Leonard, however, kept his eyes on the wing, his instincts telling him that something was off. The plane jolted again, harder this time. Rachel reached for Leonard's hand, squeezing it gently. "It's okay, sweetie. This happens all the time." Leonard nodded, but his gaze stayed locked on the illuminated seatbelt sign above. As the turbulence grew stronger, murmurs of concern spread through the cabin. The once cheerful hum of conversation had faded into an uneasy silence. As the plane shuddered with another sharp drop, a metallic clanging sound echoed faintly through the fuselage. Passengers gasped, and a baby began to cry in the back row. Leonard's heart raced as he studied the wing, which now seemed to sway unnaturally. "This isn't normal," he whispered to himself. The captain's voice returned, but this time it was tense. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We are encountering unexpected turbulence. Rest assured, we are working to stabilize the flight." Leonard furrowed his brow. Something about the captain's tone didn't match his words. What's more, the silence from the cockpit after the announcement felt wrong. He turned to Rachel. "Mom, I think there's a problem." "Leonard," Rachel said gently, "you're overthinking this. The pilots know what they're doing." Before he could respond, the plane lurched to one side, sending trays and cups clattering to the floor. Passengers screamed, clutching their armrests. The oxygen mask dropped from the ceiling, swaying ominously. Rachel hurriedly helped Leonard secure his mask, her hands trembling. The flight attendant rushed down the aisle, trying to maintain order, but her face betrayed her fear. Leonard, trying to keep calm, called out to her, "Ma'am, is everything okay in the cockpit?" The attendant stopped, her professional demeanor faltering. "Everything is under control, young man," she said, though her eyes flickered nervously toward the cockpit door. Leonard shook his head. "It's not. The captain isn't saying enough. If this were just turbulence, he'd be giving more instructions." Rachel placed a firm hand on Leonard's shoulder. "Leo, this isn't your responsibility. Stay calm and let them handle it." Before anyone could say more, the plane dipped sharply and alarms blared from the cockpit. The attendant ran toward the locked door, her face pale. Leonard's stomach twisted as he watched her input an emergency code, the door sliding open to reveal a chilling sight. Both pilots slumped over the controls, unconscious. The scene inside the cockpit was chaos. Both pilots were slumped over, their oxygen masks dangling uselessly from their faces. The cockpit alarms blared, red and yellow lights flashing across the control panel. The plane was in a slow, steady descent, and the autopilot wasn't engaged. The flight attendant clasped a hand over her mouth, her expression frozen in shock. "Oh my God," she whispered. Leonard stood behind her, trying to process what he was seeing. His instincts kicked in, fueled by years of studying flight manuals and watching countless hours of aviation videos. "The autopilot's off," he said quickly. "The plane's losing altitude. We have to act now." The flight attendant turned to him, still paralyzed by fear. I need to contact ground control," she stammered, fumbling with the radio. "Do that," Leonard said firmly, his tone far more confident than he felt. "But we need someone to stabilize the plane, or it's going to keep dropping." "Leonard," Rachel's voice called from behind him. She pushed her way into the cockpit, her face pale. "What are you doing? Get out of there." "Mom, listen to me," Leonard said, turning to her with wide, determined eyes. "The pilots are unconscious. If no one does something, this plane is going down." Rachel's lips parted in disbelief. But before she could argue, the plane shuddered violently, throwing everyone off balance. The flight attendant managed to connect with air traffic control through the radio, her voice trembling. "This is Flight 223. Both pilots are incapacitated. We need immediate assistance." A calm but urgent voice crackled through the radio. "Flight 223, this is Atlanta Air Traffic Control. Please confirm. Both pilots are unconscious." "Yes," the flight attendant replied, her voice cracking. "There's no one to fly the plane." There was a brief pause before the voice returned. "Understood. We'll guide you step by step. Is there anyone on board with flight experience?" The flight attendant's eyes darted to Leonard, who stood in the cockpit doorway. His hands trembled, but his voice was steady. "I've studied flight simulators. I know the basics." Rachel's face turned pale. "No, Leonard, you can't." "Mom, I have to," Leonard interrupted. "I know how these controls work. I can at least stabilize the plane until they guide us." The flight attendant hesitated, torn between disbelief and desperation. Finally, she stepped aside, motioning Leonard toward the co-pilot's seat. "All right, kid, but I'll stay with you the whole time." Leonard sat down, his heart pounding as he surveyed the control panel. The alarms were deafening and the flashing lights made it hard to focus. He took a deep breath and grabbed the yoke with trembling hands. "Flight 223, this is Atlanta Control," the voice said again. "Who am I speaking with?" Leonard leaned toward the radio, swallowing hard. "This is Leonard Thompson. I'm just a passenger, but I've studied planes. I'll try to follow your instructions." "All right, Leonard," the voice replied. "We're here to help you. First, check the artificial horizon on the instrument panel. It will tell you the plane's attitude. Do you see it?" Leonard scanned the panel, locating the circular display with a blue and brown background. The line separating them was tilted, confirming the plane was descending at an angle. "I see it," he said. "Good. Gently pull back on the yoke to level the plane. Not too hard, or you'll risk a stall." Leonard gripped the yoke tightly, his palms sweaty. He pulled back slowly, feeling the resistance as the massive aircraft responded. The artificial horizon's line began to straighten. "The plane's leveling out," Leonard called out, his voice tinged with both relief and adrenaline. "Excellent, Leonard," the controller replied. "Now, let's focus on maintaining altitude. Keep steady while we assess the situation." As Leonard adjusted the controls, Rachel stood behind him, her hands covering her mouth. Benjamin had joined her, his expression serious but calm. "You've got this, kid," Benjamin said, his voice steady. "We all believe in you." For the first time since stepping into the cockpit, Leonard allowed himself a flicker of hope. The cockpit was a cacophony of blaring alarms and flashing lights, but Leonard's focus didn't waver. His hands gripped the yoke firmly as he concentrated on the artificial horizon, doing his best to keep the plane steady. "Atlanta Control, the plane's leveled out, but we're still losing altitude," Leonard reported, his voice shaky but determined. "Understood, Leonard." The air traffic controller responded calmly. "Check the altimeter. It's a circular gauge near the top of the instrument panel. Tell me the current altitude." Leonard located the gauge and squinted at the numbers. We're at 28,000 feet and dropping. All right, your first priority is to maintain altitude. Slowly increase engine power by pushing the throttle levers forward. They're on your right. Leonard reached for the throttles, his movements careful but deliberate. The engine roar deepened as he pushed the levers forward. The plane's descent began to slow, and the altimeter needle steadied. "It's working," Leonard said, his voice tinged with relief. "Good job, Leonard," the controller praised. "Now monitor the speed indicator to ensure we're within a safe range. It's the gauge with the needle pointing to the airspeed." Leonard scanned the panel and spotted the airspeed indicator. The needle hovered dangerously close to the red zone. "The speed's too high," Leonard said. "Pull back on the throttles slightly to reduce engine power," the controller instructed. "Make small adjustments and keep an eye on the airspeed." Leonard followed the instructions, his hands moving with precision despite the weight of the responsibility pressing on him. The airspeed began to drop into the safe range, and the plane felt more stable. "You're doing amazing, Leonard," Benjamin said from behind him. "We're all counting on you, and you're rising to the occasion." Leonard gave a small nod, his focus locked on the instruments. He couldn't afford to fail. The calm was short-lived. Another alarm blared, this one louder and more urgent. A red light flashed on the secondary panel, and Leonard's stomach tightened. "Atlanta Control, there's a new warning light," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "It says, hydraulic system failure." There was a brief pause before the controller replied, his tone more serious. "That's critical, Leonard. The hydraulic system controls essential functions, like the flaps and landing gear. Without it, landing will be extremely difficult." Leonard's chest tightened. "Is there a backup system?" "Yes, but it's manual. You'll need to activate it. Look for a switch labeled hydraulic override on the lower right panel." Leonard scanned the panel, his heart racing. "I see it," he said. "Flip the switch to engage the backup system. It won't restore full functionality, but it will give you enough control to stabilize the plane." Leonard flipped the switch, and the red warning light dimmed slightly. He felt a slight resistance in the controls as the backup system kicked in. "It's engaged," Leonard reported. "Good. Keep an eye on the controls. The backup system requires more physical effort, so be prepared for some resistance," the controller said. As Leonard adjusted the plane's heading, sweat dripped down his forehead. Every movement of the yoke felt heavier, and his arms began to ache. "Leonard, how are you holding up?" Rachel asked, her voice full of concern. "I'm okay, Mom," Leonard replied, though the strain in his voice was evident. Benjamin stepped closer, placing a reassuring hand on Leonard's shoulder. "You're not alone, kid. We've got your back." Leonard took a deep breath, finding strength in their support. "Atlanta Control, the plane's stable for now. What's next?" "Next, we prepare for descent and landing," the controller said. "But first, we need to ensure the landing gear will deploy. Are you ready for the next step?" Leonard's hands tightened on the yoke as he nodded. "I'm ready." The air traffic controller's voice remained calm as Leonard steadied the aircraft, though the weight of the situation pressed heavily on him. "Leonard, Atlanta Control began. Before we start the descent, we need to focus on two things: verifying the landing gear and setting up the flaps. First, let's check the landing gear indicators. Look for 3 green lights on the lower right panel." Leonard scanned the panel and frowned. "There are no green lights. Does that mean the landing gear isn't down?" "That's correct," the controller said. "The landing gear should deploy automatically, but with a hydraulic system failure, that may not happen. We'll need to use the manual override." The words hung in the air like a heavy weight. Leonard swallowed hard. "How do I do that?" Underneath the main console, there's a lever labeled Landing Gear Override. You'll need to crank it manually. It might take some effort, so be prepared. Leonard leaned forward and found the lever. He grabbed it with both hands and began to turn, his arms straining as the mechanism resisted. Benjamin quickly stepped in to help, his larger frame making the task a little easier. Together, they cranked the lever until a loud clunk echoed through the cabin. 3 green lights flickered on the panel. "The gear is down," Leonard exclaimed, his voice filled with relief. "Excellent, Leonard," the controller said. "Now, let's focus on the flaps. Look for the flap controls to your right. Set them to 15 degrees for the initial descent." Leonard adjusted the controls, watching the corresponding gauge on the panel. The plane's flaps lowered slightly, creating more lift and reducing the speed. "The flaps are set," Leonard confirmed. "Good. You're doing a fantastic job, Leonard," the controller said. "Now, we'll start guiding you toward the runway. Keep steady and follow my instructions carefully." As the plane began its gradual descent, the atmosphere in the cabin was tense. Passengers gripped their armrests, some whispering prayers while others exchanged worried glances. The hum of the engine seemed louder than ever. Rachel stood just behind Leonard, her eyes filled with both fear and pride. "You're incredible, Leo," she said softly. Leonard didn't respond. His focus was locked on the instruments, his hands gripping the yoke tightly. The plane shook slightly as they descended through thick clouds, obscuring the view outside. "Atlanta Control, visibility is really bad," Leonard said, glancing at the windows. "Understood, Leonard," the controller replied. "The runway's approach lights will guide you as you get closer. Until then, trust your instruments. Do not rely on visual cues." Leonard nodded, though his heart raced at the thought of flying blind. He adjusted the heading knob as instructed, aligning the plane with the approach path to the runway. "Leonard, how's the speed?" the controller asked. "It's holding steady at 180 knots," Leonard said after checking the airspeed indicator. "Good. As you get closer, reduce to 155 knots. That will help with the final approach," the controller instructed. The plane hit a patch of turbulence, causing it to jolt violently. Gasps and screams erupted from the cabin. Leonard's knuckles turned white as he fought to stabilize the aircraft. "It's okay," the controller's voice came through the radio. "Stay calm, Leonard. Use small adjustments on the yoke to counter the turbulence." Leonard took a deep breath and followed the instructions, his movements steady despite the fear gnawing at him. Gradually, the shaking subsided. "You're doing great, Leonard," Benjamin said, his tone steady and reassuring. "You've got this." As the plane descended further, the clouds began to thin, revealing faint glimpses of city lights below. Leonard's chest tightened with anticipation. "Atlanta Control, I think I can see the ground," he said. "You're almost there, Leonard," the controller replied. "Prepare for the most critical phase, the landing." The city lights below grew brighter as the plane broke through the final layer of clouds. Leonard's heart raced. For the first time, the reality of the situation fully hit him. He was about to attempt something that even experienced pilots would find challenging. "Atlanta Control," Leonard said, his voice steady but tinged with nerves. "I see the runway lights." "Excellent, Leonard," the controller responded. "You're now on final approach. Adjust your heading slightly to align perfectly with the runway. Use the navigation display to guide you." Leonard turned the heading knob, watching the plane's alignment improve on the display. The glowing runway lights stretched ahead like a beacon in the dark, their soft pulses promising safety. "Now reduce your speed to 135 knots, the controller instructed. Ease the throttle levers back slowly, one at a time. Leonard's hands trembled as he reached for the throttle levers. He pulled them back cautiously, feeling the plane's vibrations shift as its speed decreased. "Speed is at 135 knots, Leonard confirmed. "Good," the controller said. "Set the flaps to 30 degrees to create more lift for the landing." Leonard adjusted the flap controls, his movements smooth and deliberate. The plane responded, descending at a steady angle toward the runway. The cabin was eerily quiet except for the hum of the engines and the faint rustle of passengers gripping their seats. Rachel stood behind Leonard, her hands clasped tightly together. "Leo, you're almost there," she said softly, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and hope. "I know, Mom," Leonard replied, his eyes fixed on the glowing runway ahead. Leonard, the controller's voice cut in. This is the most critical part. When you're about 20 feet above the runway, gently pull back on the yoke to flare the nose. This will ensure a smoother touchdown. Got it, Leonard said, his focus intensifying. The runway loomed closer, its lights stretching out in both directions. The altimeter ticked downward rapidly. 200 feet, 150 feet, 100 feet. Leonard's breathing quickened, but his grip on the yoke remained firm. At 50 feet, the plane began to shake from the ground effect, turbulence caused by the proximity to the runway. Leonard adjusted the yoke slightly, steadying the descent. 20 feet, the controller said. Flare now, Leonard. Pull back gently. Leonard pulled the yoke toward him with steady hands, lifting the nose of the plane. The main landing gear touched the runway with a jarring thud, followed by the nose gear seconds later. The aircraft bounced slightly, but stayed aligned with the runway. You're on the ground, the controller said, his voice filled with relief. Engage the thrust reversers and apply the brakes. Leonard pushed the thrust levers into reverse, and the engines roared loudly, slowing the plane. He pressed the brake pedals gently, feeling the massive aircraft gradually decelerate. The runways then approached quickly, but the plane came to a full stop just in time. For a moment, there was complete silence. Then the cabin erupted into cheers and applause. Rachel collapsed into tears of relief, pulling Leonard into a tight hug. You did it, Leo. You saved us. Benjamin clapped Leonard on the shoulder, his expression a mixture of pride and disbelief. Kid, that was incredible. You're a hero. Leonard exhaled deeply, his hands trembling as he released the yoke. He looked out the cockpit window at the emergency vehicles racing toward them, their lights flashing in the night. Atlantic Control, Leonard said into the radio, his voice cracking with emotion. The plane is down safely. Outstanding work, Leonard, the controller replied. You just saved everyone on board. You're a hero. Leonard sank back into the co-pilot seat, his heart pounding. For the first time since the ordeal began, he allowed himself to believe it was finally over. As the plane sat motionless on the runway, the cheers and applause from the cabin grew louder, echoing through the fuselage. Passengers unbuckled their seatbelts, many wiping tears of relief as they clung to their loved ones. Leonard sat in the co-pilot seat, his hands still trembling. The adrenaline was beginning to wear off, leaving a deep fatigue in its wake. Rachel knelt beside him, wrapping her arms around her son. You were so brave, Leo, she said, her voice thick with emotion. I can't believe what you just did. Leonard didn't respond immediately. His gaze was fixed on the now quiet cockpit instruments, as if he were still processing the enormity of what had just happened. The flight attendant stepped into the cockpit, her face a mixture of exhaustion and awe. Leonard, the passengers want to thank you. They're calling you a hero. I just did what I had to, Leonard murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. Emergency vehicles surrounded the aircraft, their flashing lights casting eerie patterns across the runway. Firefighters and paramedics approached cautiously, ready to assist. The pilot's condition was still unknown, and their unconscious forms were being tended to by medical personnel. Benjamin appeared at the cockpit door, his suit slightly disheveled but his composure intact. Kid, you just pulled off something incredible. You kept your cool under pressure like a seasoned pro. Leonard managed a faint smile. Thanks, Mr. Caldwell. Call me Ben, he replied warmly. And trust me, this won't be the last time we hear your name. As the passengers began to disembark down portable stairs brought by the emergency crew, applause and cheers erupted again. Leonard hesitated at the cockpit door, suddenly feeling self-conscious under all the attention. You coming, Leo? Rachel asked, holding out her hand. I guess, he said hesitantly. It's just a lot. Benjamin gave him an encouraging nudge. You deserve this moment, Leonard. Step out there and let them see the kid who saved their lives. Reluctantly, Leonard stepped out onto the top of the stairs. The crisp night air hit him, carrying with it the faint smell of jet fuel and the sounds of applause from the gathered crowd. Firefighters, paramedics, and airport staff stood in rows, clapping and cheering as Leonard descended the stairs. Rachel stayed close, her arm wrapped protectively around him, while Benjamin walked just behind, nodding to those who had gathered. At the bottom of the stairs, a gray-haired man in a reflective vest approached, his hand outstretched. "Leonard Thompson?" he asked. Leonard nodded. "I'm Captain Harris, Chief of Airport Operations," the man said, shaking Leonard's hand firmly. "What you did tonight was nothing short of extraordinary. You saved countless lives." Leonard flushed with embarrassment, looking down at his scuffed sneakers. "I just did what I could." Captain Harris smiled. "Well, what you could was enough to make you a hero. The FAA will want to hear this story." As more emergency personnel gathered to greet him, reporters began to push through the crowd, their cameras flashing. Microphones were thrust forward, voices clamoring for his attention. "How did you learn to fly a plane at just 12 years old? What was going through your mind during the landing? Do you want to be a pilot someday?" Leonard shrank back, overwhelmed by the questions. Rachel stepped forward, shielding him from the cameras. "Please," she said firmly. "He's just a kid. Let him rest." The reporters hesitated but backed off, allowing Leonard and Rachel to make their way to a waiting shuttle. Benjamin followed, placing a reassuring hand on Leonard's shoulder. "You handled yourself up there like a pro," Benjamin said. "But down here, it's okay to let others take care of you for a while." As the shuttle drove them toward the terminal, Leonard leaned against his mother, his exhaustion finally catching up to him. The sounds of applause faded into the distance, leaving only the quiet hum of the engine. For the first time since the ordeal began, Leonard felt safe. The airport terminal was unusually quiet as Leonard, Rachel, and Benjamin were ushered into a private lounge by airport officials. Outside, a frenzy of media activity unfolded, but inside, the atmosphere was calm. Leonard sat on a plush couch, his head resting on Rachel's shoulder. Exhaustion was etched into every part of his body, but his mind buzzed with lingering adrenaline and fragmented memories of the cockpit. "I can't believe I actually did that," Leonard muttered. "You didn't just do it, Leo. You saved everyone," Rachel said, brushing his hair back. "I've never been more proud of you." Benjamin sat across from them, sipping a bottle of water. "Kid, you didn't just save lives. You made history tonight. You're going to inspire a lot of people." Leonard glanced at him, unsure how to process the praise. "I just did what I had to. I didn't want anyone to get hurt." Before Benjamin could reply, a knock on the door interrupted them. Captain Harris entered with two men in suits, one holding a clipboard and the other carrying an official FAA badge. "Leonard," Captain Harris began, "these gentlemen are from the FAA. They'd like to speak with you about what happened tonight." Leonard stiffened, his nerves kicking in. "Am I in trouble?" The man with the clipboard chuckled. "Quite the opposite, son. We just want to document your actions and learn from your experience. What you did tonight was remarkable." Rachel placed a reassuring hand on Leonard's back. "It's okay, Leo. Just tell them what you told me." Over the next half hour, Leonard recounted everything. His initial realization that something was wrong, his steps to stabilize the plane, and the guidance from Atlantic Control. The FAA officials took detailed notes, nodding as Leonard spoke. "You showed incredible composure under pressure," one of them said as they wrapped up. "We'll be reviewing this incident for a long time. Thank you, Leonard." As they left, Captain Harris lingered. "Get some rest, son. You've earned it." The next morning, Leonard woke up in a hotel room near the airport. Sunlight streamed through the curtains, and for a moment he felt disoriented, unsure if everything that had happened was real. Rachel entered the room, carrying a tray with a modest breakfast. "Morning, sleepyhead," she said with a soft smile. "How are you feeling?" "Tired," Leonard admitted, sitting up. "But I guess okay." Rachel set the tray on the nightstand. "We're heading home this afternoon. The airline has arranged another flight for us. Leonard's stomach twisted. Another plane? Rachel chuckled. Don't worry, Leo. This one won't need you in the cockpit. He managed a small smile, but the thought of flying again so soon made his hands sweat. Still, he knew his mother was right. It was just a plane ride. At the airport, Leonard noticed a subtle shift in how people looked at him. Some passengers whispered and pointed, while others approached to thank him. A flight attendant handed him another set of airline wings, this time saying, "These are for the bravest co-pilot we've ever had." Benjamin met them at the gate, having arranged to be on the same flight. "Ready for another adventure, kid?" he asked with a grin. Leonard hesitated before nodding. "Yeah, I think so." The flight was uneventful, but Leonard couldn't help feeling a newfound connection to the plane. He listened intently to the announcements, noticed every adjustment of the flaps, and felt a quiet pride in understanding it all. When they landed safely in Austin, the tension in Leonard's chest finally eased. As they walked through the terminal, he saw a small group of reporters waiting, but turned to Rachel with a pleading look. She wrapped an arm around him. "Not today," she said firmly to the crowd. Back at home, Leonard collapsed onto his bed, staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars on his ceiling. The night's events replayed in his mind, but this time they felt less like a nightmare and more like a story, his story. "I'm going to do it," he whispered to himself. "One day, I'll be a real pilot." And for the first time, the dream didn't feel so far away. It didn't take long for the story of Leonard's heroic actions to spread. By the time he returned home, social media was buzzing with posts about the 12-year-old hero who had landed a commercial jet. News outlets aired interviews with passengers who recounted the terrifying ordeal and the young boy who had saved them. Rachel tried to shield Leonard from the attention, but the phone didn't stop ringing. Local news reporters showed up at their doorstep, and strangers left notes of gratitude in their mailbox. Even their neighbors, who had always seen Leonard as a shy and quiet kid, looked at him with new admiration. One afternoon, as Leonard sat at the kitchen table flipping through an aviation manual, Rachel came and holding her phone. "Leo, you need to see this." She handed him the phone, which displayed a video clip of Captain Sullivan, a retired airline pilot, being interviewed on national television. "What this young man did is extraordinary," the captain said. "His composure, quick thinking, and understanding of the aircraft are qualities we look for in professional pilots. He's a natural." Leonard's face flushed. "He's talking about me?" Rachel smiled. "Yes, he is. People are starting to recognize how special you are." Leonard set the phone down, unsure how to feel. The praise was overwhelming, and part of him wanted everything to go back to normal. But deep down, a flicker of pride warmed his chest. A few days later, as Leonard was finishing a practice flight on his simulator, Rachel walked into his room, her face glowing with excitement. "Leo, there's someone on the phone for you," she said. "Who is it?" he asked, pulling off his headset. Rachel hesitated, her smile widening. "You'll want to hear this for yourself." Leonard took the phone, pressing it to his ear. "Hello. Hello, Leonard. My name is Captain Harris. I'm with the FAA, and I've been following your story." Leonard sat up straighter. "Oh, hi, sir. I just wanted to personally congratulate you," Captain Harris said. "What you did was nothing short of remarkable. I'm also calling to invite you to visit our headquarters. We'd like to honor you in person and introduce you to some of our team." Leonard's eyes widened. "You mean like a tour?" "Exactly," Captain Harris replied. "And who knows, maybe you'll inspire the next generation of pilots while you're here." Leonard felt his heart race. "I'd love to, sir. Thank you so much." When the call ended, Leonard turned to Rachel, his excitement spilling over. "Mom, the FAA wants to honor me. They're inviting me to their headquarters." Rachel beamed with pride. "That's incredible, Leo. You've earned this." As Leonard lay in bed that night, he stared at the stars on his ceiling with a new sense of purpose. This wasn't just about surviving an emergency. It was about the possibilities ahead. Possibilities he never imagined would open up so soon. A week later, Leonard and Rachel arrived at the FAA headquarters, a sleek, modern building surrounded by carefully manicured lawns. The trip felt surreal to Leonard, who clutched his backpack tightly as they stepped inside. They were greeted by Captain Harris himself, a tall man with a warm smile and a firm handshake. "Leonard, it's a privilege to finally meet you in person," he said. "Thank you, sir," Leonard replied, feeling both nervous and excited. As they walked through the building, Leonard's eyes widened at the array of simulators, control panels, and displays showcasing aviation history. Employees stopped to shake his hand or offer a few kind words, and Leonard found himself blushing from all the attention. The tour culminated in a large conference room filled with FAA officials, pilots, and reporters. A podium stood at the front, and behind it was a banner that read, "Honoring our youngest hero." Rachel gave Leonard a gentle nudge. "This is for you, sweetheart." As Leonard walked to the podium, the room erupted into applause. Captain Harris introduced him, recounting his bravery and quick thinking during the emergency. "Leonard is proof that passion and preparation can make a difference, no matter your age," Harris said. When it was Leonard's turn to speak, he hesitated for a moment, gripping the edges of the podium. The room grew quiet. "I'm just a kid who loves planes," he began, his voice steady but shy. "I didn't save the plane alone. I had help from the flight attendants, the air traffic controllers, and everyone who believed in me. I just did what I could." The crowd burst into applause once more, and Leonard felt a wave of pride and gratitude wash over him. After the ceremony, Captain Harris pulled Leonard aside. "Leonard, there's one more thing we'd like to offer you." Leonard tilted his head curiously. "What is it, sir?" "We have a state-of-the-art flight simulator here, the same kind used to train professional pilots," Harris explained. "How would you like to try it out?" Leonard's eyes lit up. "Really? I can actually use it?" "Absolutely," Harris said, leading him down a corridor to a room filled with towering screens and realistic cockpit controls. The simulator was an exact replica of a commercial aircraft's cockpit, complete with every lever, switch, and gauge Leonard had dreamed of seeing up close. Rachel and a few officials watched from a viewing area as Leonard strapped himself into the pilot's seat. A technician guided him through the setup, and soon, the screens around him flickered to life, displaying a virtual runway. "Take off when you're ready, Leonard," the technician said. Leonard's hands moved instinctively over the controls. Years of simulator practice paying off as he guided the plane down the virtual runway and into the sky. The flight felt astonishingly real. The vibrations, the sounds, even the subtle resistance in the yoke. As he navigated through simulated clouds and handled a few practice maneuvers, the technicians exchanged impressed glances. Captain Harris leaned toward Rachel. "Your son has a real gift. He's got the instincts of a seasoned pilot." After the session, Leonard stepped out of the simulator, his face glowing with exhilaration. "That was amazing. It felt so real." Harris smiled. "You've got a bright future ahead of you, Leonard. If you want it, we'll help you get there." Rachel hugged her son tightly. "Leo, this is just the beginning." Leonard looked back at the simulator, his mind racing with possibilities. For the first time, his dream of becoming a pilot didn't feel like a distant fantasy. It felt like destiny. Returning home to Austin, Leonard tried to adjust to his normal life, but nothing felt the same. His classmates stared at him in awe, and his teachers treated him with newfound respect. Strangers in the grocery store recognized him, pointing and whispering, "That's the kid who saved the plane." At first, the attention was exciting, but soon it became overwhelming. Leonard missed the quiet moments with his flight simulator, where he could dream without feeling the weight of expectations. One afternoon, as he walked home from school, Rachel met him at the door with a warm smile. "How was your day, sweetheart?" "Okay," Leonard mumbled, dropping his backpack by the door. "Everyone keeps asking me about the flight. It's like they don't see me anymore. They just see the kid who landed a plane." Rachel pulled him into a hug. "That's because what you did was incredible, Leo. but I know it's a lot to handle. Remember, you're still you. You don't have to be anything more than yourself." Leonard nodded, though he wasn't sure how to make sense of it all. That evening, he sat at his desk, staring at his simulator. He opened a new scenario, a calm flight over a virtual Caribbean sea. As the plane climbed, Leonard felt a sense of peace return. The cockpit might be virtual, but in it, he was free to focus, dream, and just be himself. A few days later, Leonard received a call from Benjamin Caldwell. "Hey, kid," Benjamin's cheerful voice rang out. "How's my favorite pilot?" Leonard grinned despite himself. "I'm good, Mr. Caldwell. How are you?" "Better, now that I've got an idea. I've been thinking about what happened on that flight, and it's clear to me that your story could inspire a lot of people. How would you feel about coming to one of my company's events as a guest speaker?" Leonard blinked, surprised. "A speaker? You mean I'd have to talk in front of people?" "Not just people. Future innovators, engineers, and dreamers," Benjamin said. "We're hosting a youth summit to encourage kids to pursue their passions. Who better to inspire them than someone their age who's already made history?" Leonard hesitated. Public speaking wasn't exactly his comfort zone. "I don't know. What if I mess up?" Benjamin's voice softened. "Leonard, you've done something most adults couldn't even imagine. You've already proven you can handle pressure. All you have to do is share your story." After a long pause, Leonard nodded, even though Benjamin couldn't see him. "Okay, I'll do it." "Attaboy," Benjamin said. "I'll have my assistant send you the details. This is going to be great." As Leonard hung up, Rachel walked in. "Who was that?" "Mr. Caldwell," Leonard said. "He wants me to speak at a summit for kids." Rachel's eyes widened with pride. "That's an amazing opportunity, Leo." "I guess," Leonard said, his voice uncertain. "What if I don't know what to say?" Rachel knelt beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Just be honest. Tell them about your love for flying, how it started, and what it's taught you. That's all you need to do." Leonard took a deep breath. "Okay, I'll try." As he returned to his simulator that evening, a small voice in the back of his mind whispered, "Maybe I can inspire others the way I was inspired." Over the next week, Leonard focused on preparing for his speech at Benjamin's Youth Summit. The idea of speaking to a large audience made his palms sweat, but he knew this was an opportunity to make a difference. Each evening after school, Rachel helped him rehearse in their living room. Leonard would stand behind a small podium they'd improvised from a cardboard box while Rachel and a few supportive neighbors sat on the couch, pretending to be his audience. "Start with what made you fall in love with flying," Rachel suggested one evening. Leonard nodded. "Okay, here goes. Hi, everyone. My name is Leonard Thompson. Ever since I was 6 years old, I've been fascinated by airplanes. I spent hours on a flight simulator, learning everything I could about how planes work." Rachel clapped encouragingly. "That's perfect. Now, tell them about the flight and what you felt in the cockpit." Leonard hesitated, his gaze dropping to the floor. "It's hard to explain. I was scared, but I also knew I had to try. There were so many people counting on me. I couldn't let them down." "That's what they'll want to hear," Rachel said gently. "Your honesty is what will inspire them." As the days passed, Leonard's confidence began to grow. He practiced his speech until the words felt natural, even comfortable. Still, the thought of standing on stage under bright lights was daunting. On the night before the summit, Rachel found Leonard sitting at his desk, staring at a model airplane he'd built years ago. "You ready for tomorrow?" she asked. "I think so," Leonard replied. "I just hope they like what I have to say." "They will," Rachel said, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Just be yourself, Leo. That's all you need to do." The next day, Leonard and Rachel arrived at a sleek conference center bustling with activity. The youth summit was in full swing, with students, parents, and industry professionals mingling in the brightly lit halls. Booths displayed cutting-edge technology, from drones to virtual reality systems, and the air buzzed with excitement. A member of Benjamin's team greeted them at the entrance and escorted them backstage to the main auditorium. Leonard peeked through the curtains, his stomach flipping as he saw the packed room of hundreds of eager faces. "You'll do great," Rachel whispered, giving his hand a reassuring squeeze. Moments later, Benjamin appeared, his presence calm and commanding. "Leonard, you ready, kid?" "As ready as I'll ever be," Leonard replied, his voice wavering slightly. Benjamin smiled. "You've got this. Remember, they're here to hear your story. Just speak from the heart." When Leonard's name was announced, the auditorium erupted into applause. He stepped onto the stage, the bright lights momentarily blinding him. His heart pounded as he approached the podium, gripping the edges tightly to steady his hands. "Hi," he began, his voice cracking slightly. He cleared his throat and tried again. "Hi, everyone. My name is Leonard Thompson, and I'm just a kid who loves planes." A ripple of laughter and warmth spread through the audience, easing Leonard's nerves. He continued, telling them about his passion for flying, how he spent countless hours on his simulator, and how that knowledge helped him during the flight. As he described the moment he stepped into the cockpit, the room grew silent, every face focused on him. "I wasn't sure I could do it," Leonard admitted, his voice steady now. "But I knew I had to try. What I learned that day is that preparation and believing in yourself can make the impossible seem possible." When he finished, the crowd erupted into a standing ovation. Leonard's cheeks burned with pride as he stepped back from the podium. Backstage, Benjamin was waiting with a grin. "You crushed it, kid. I told you they'd love you." Rachel pulled Leonard into a hug. "You were amazing, Leo. I'm so proud of you." As they left the stage, Leonard felt lighter, as if a new chapter in his life had just begun. Leonard's speech became the highlight of the summit. Clips of his presentation flooded social media, and news outlets praised his ability to inspire both kids and adults. People from all walks of life reached out to Leonard, sharing how his story had impacted them. "I've always wanted to be a pilot, but I was scared I wasn't good enough," one email read. "Hearing your story gave me the push I needed to start my training. Thank you, Leonard." Another message came from a single father. "My daughter struggles with confidence. After hearing your speech," she said, "if Leonard can be brave, so can I." You've inspired her to join her school's robotics club." Rachel printed some of the letters and pinned them on a corkboard in Leonard's room. "Look at how many lives you're touching," she said one evening. Leonard studied the board, his eyes lingering on the handwritten notes. "I didn't think this would happen. I just wanted to tell my story." "That's the beauty of it," Rachel said. "Your story is real, Leo. That's why it matters." One afternoon, Leonard and Rachel were invited to an aviation event at the local airport. It was a smaller gathering, primarily for aviation enthusiasts, but Leonard was eager to attend. As they walked through the hangar, admiring vintage planes and cutting-edge designs, a man in a crisp pilot's uniform approached them. His silver captain's wings gleamed under the overhead lights. "Leonard Thompson?" the man asked, extending a hand. "Yes, sir," Leonard replied, shaking his hand. "I'm Captain Marcus Taylor," the man said with a warm smile. "I'm a captain with a major airline. I've been following your story, and I wanted to meet you in person." Leonard's eyes widened. "It's an honor to meet you, Captain Taylor." "The honor's mine," Taylor said. "I've been flying for over 20 years, and I can tell you that what you did takes not just knowledge, but heart. You've got both, Leonard. That's rare." Leonard blushed. "Thank you, sir. That means a lot." Captain Taylor leaned closer, his tone encouraging. "If you ever need guidance or advice, don't hesitate to reach out. Pilots stick together, and I have no doubt you'll be one of us someday." As Captain Taylor walked away, Leonard turned to Rachel, his face glowing with excitement. "Mom, did you hear that? He said I could be a pilot." Rachel laughed softly. "Leo, you've already proven you have what it takes. This is just the beginning." That night, Leonard lay awake in bed, staring at the stars on his ceiling. For the first time, his dream of becoming a pilot didn't feel like a distant hope. It felt real, tangible, and entirely possible. The encounter with Captain Marcus Taylor lingered in Leonard's mind. He couldn't stop thinking about the captain's words, the confidence they carried, and the way they made his dream feel within reach. A few days later, Leonard received an email. "Hi, Leonard. It was an honor meeting you at the aviation event. As I mentioned, I'd like to support your journey into aviation. If you're interested, I'd love to invite you to my airline's training facility for a tour and a chance to meet some of our crew. Let me know what you think. Best, Captain Marcus Taylor." Leonard practically jumped out of his chair. "Mom, Captain Taylor wants to show me a real training facility." Rachel smiled from the kitchen. "That's incredible, Leo. Are you going to accept?" "Of course," Leonard said, already typing his reply. The following weekend, Leonard and Rachel arrived at the training center, where Captain Taylor greeted them warmly. "Welcome to where the magic happens," he said with a grin. The tour was everything Leonard could have hoped for. He walked through full-motion flight simulators, watched a demonstration of emergency procedures, and even sat in on a briefing with pilots preparing for their next flights. At the end of the visit, Captain Taylor handed Leonard a small notebook. "This is my personal flight log from when I was training," he explained. "It's filled with notes, challenges, and lessons I learned. I think it might help you as you start your own journey." Leonard took the notebook carefully, as though it were made of gold. "Thank you, Captain Taylor. I'll take good care of it." "Keep dreaming big," Leonard Taylor said. "I'm certain you'll achieve everything you set your mind to." Back home, Leonard dove into the notebook Captain Taylor had given him. Each page was filled with meticulous notes about navigation, weather patterns, and technical maneuvers, interspersed with personal reflections. One entry caught Leonard's attention. "Every great pilot faces moments of doubt. What defines us is how we push through them. Remember why you started and keep moving forward." Leonard copied the quote onto a sticky note and placed it on his desk. It became his mantra during the weeks that followed. Determined to take his passion further, Leonard began researching aviation programs for teenagers. One evening, he found an article about a summer camp for aspiring pilots held at a local airfield. The program included hands-on experience with small planes, lessons in aerodynamics, and even a chance to log flight hours. "Mom," Leonard called, running into the living room. "Look at this." Rachel scanned the website he had pulled up. "A summer aviation camp? Leo, this sounds perfect for you." "It's a little expensive, though," Leonard said, frowning at the tuition. Rachel thought for a moment before smiling. "You let me worry about that. If this is what you want, we'll make it happen." Leonard threw his arms around her. "Thanks, Mom. I won't let you down." Over the next few weeks, Rachel worked overtime shifts while Leonard prepared for the camp. He read every aviation book he could find, practiced on his simulator, and memorized terms he thought might come up. When the camp acceptance letter arrived in the mail, Leonard could hardly believe it. This was the first step toward his dream, a step he was ready to take. The day finally arrived for Leonard to attend the aviation summer camp. The airfield was a sprawling expanse, dotted with small aircraft glinting in the sunlight. Leonard could barely contain his excitement as Rachel pulled up to the main building. "Remember, Leo," Rachel said as she parked the car, "you've already proven you can handle anything. Just enjoy the experience." Leonard nodded, clutching his backpack. "Thanks, Mom. I'll make the most of it." Inside, the atmosphere buzzed with energy as campers from all over the region gathered. Some were older teenagers, others closer to Leonard's age, but all shared the same wide-eyed excitement about flying. An instructor, a tall woman with aviator sunglasses and a clipboard, stepped forward. "Welcome to the Aviation Summer Camp. Over the next few weeks, you'll learn the fundamentals of flight, explore aviation history, and most importantly, get hands-on experience in the cockpit." Leonard's heart leaped. The thought of sitting in a real cockpit again filled him with both anticipation and a bit of nervousness. The first day consisted of an introduction to the planes they'd be flying, small, single-engine aircraft that were a far cry from the Boeing 737 Leonard had landed. Still, as he ran his hand along the wing of one of the planes, he felt a familiar sense of wonder. During a group session, the instructor asked each camper to share why they were there. When it was Leonard's turn, he hesitated briefly before saying, "I've always loved planes, and I had a chance to land one during an emergency. It made me realize this is what I want to do with my life." The room fell silent, every pair of eyes on him. Then the instructor smiled. "That's quite a story, Leonard. I think we're all going to learn a lot from you two." By the second day of camp, Leonard was ready to fly. His instructor, a seasoned pilot named Mr. Reynolds, led him to a Cessna 172, a sturdy, reliable training aircraft. "All right, Leonard," Mr. Reynolds said as they approached the plane. "You've studied the theory. Now, let's put it into practice. How familiar are you with pre-flight checks?" "I've read about them, but I've never done one in real life," Leonard admitted. Mr. Reynolds nodded. "No problem. I'll walk you through it." Together, they inspected the aircraft, checking the fuel, oil levels, and control surfaces. Leonard absorbed every detail, asking questions and taking mental notes. Once they were strapped in, Mr. Reynolds handed Leonard the headset. "Ready to start the engine?" Leonard's hands hovered over the controls, a mix of excitement and nervousness coursing through him. "Ready," he said, his voice firm. Following Mr. Reynolds' guidance, Leonard started the engine, feeling the vibration rumble through the cockpit. As they taxied to the runway, he couldn't help but grin. "All right, Leonard," Mr. Reynolds said as they reached the threshold of the runway. "I'll handle the rudder pedals for now, but I want you to control the yoke. Take us up." Leonard's hands gripped the yoke tightly as he gently pushed the throttle forward. The plane accelerated, and he felt the wheels lift off the ground. For the first time, he was flying a plane, not in a simulator, but for real. "You're doing great," Mr. Reynolds said. "Keep your eyes on the horizon and adjust your pitch slightly." As the plane climbed higher, Leonard's nerves melted away, replaced by a deep sense of awe. Below him, the world stretched out in all directions, fields, roads, and rivers glittering under the sun. "This is incredible," Leonard said, his voice filled with wonder. Mr. Reynolds smiled. "Welcome to the skies, Leonard. Something tells me you're going to spend a lot of time up here." Leonard couldn't stop smiling as he guided the plane through gentle turns, feeling a sense of freedom he'd never experienced before. This wasn't just a dream anymore. It was real. As the days passed, Leonard's skills in the cockpit improved dramatically. With each flight, he grew more comfortable handling the controls, reading the instruments, and making small adjustments to keep the plane steady. "Leonard," Mr. Reynolds said during one flight, "you've got a natural touch. Most beginners overcorrect or freeze up when something feels off, but you stay calm and focused. That's rare." Leonard beamed at the praise, though he couldn't help but think back to his emergency landing. "I guess I learned to stay calm when I didn't have a choice," he said, gripping the yoke firmly. On the ground, Leonard bonded with his fellow campers. Despite their initial awe at his story, they quickly grew to see him as just another aviation enthusiast. Together, they studied navigation charts, competed in takeoff drills, and even shared laughs over the occasional rookie mistake. One evening, as the sun set over the airfield, Leonard sat with a group of campers by a fire pit. "What made you fall in love with flying?" one of them asked. Leonard looked up at the fading light, a thoughtful smile on his face. "It's hard to explain. Being in the air feels peaceful. Like everything makes sense up there." The group nodded in agreement, and Leonard realized he'd found a community of people who truly understood his passion. By the final week of camp, the instructors introduced a new challenge: solo landings. Each camper would have the chance to take off, circle the airfield, and land without assistance. "Leonard," Mr. Reynolds said during their morning briefing, "you've already proven you can land a plane under extreme circumstances. This should be a breeze for you." Leonard laughed nervously. It's different when you know someone's guiding you, though. That's true, Mr. Reynolds admitted. But I'll be in the control tower, watching and ready to jump in if you need help. Trust yourself, you've got this. When it was Leonard's turn, he climbed into the cockpit of the Cessna, his heart pounding. He ran through the pre-flight checklist meticulously, double-checking every detail. As the engine roared to life, Leonard taxied to the runway. The control tower crackled in his headset. You're clear for takeoff, Leonard. Good luck. Taking a deep breath, Leonard pushed the throttle forward, feeling the familiar rush as the plane lifted off the ground. The climb was smooth, and Leonard marveled at the view below. Focus, he reminded himself, adjusting the trim and checking his altitude. As he approached the pattern for landing, a gust of wind rocked the plane slightly. Leonard's grip on the yoke tightened and his pulse quickened. Stay calm, Mr. Reynolds' voice came through the radio. Make small corrections. Don't fight the wind. Work with it. Leonard adjusted the yoke gently, aligning the plane with the runway. The wind made the descent bumpy, but he remembered the advice he'd heard so many times. Trust the instruments. At 20 feet above the ground, Leonard flared the nose slightly, just as he had practiced. The wheels touched down with a jolt, followed by a satisfying roll along the runway. As he taxied back to the hangar, cheers erupted from his fellow campers and instructors. Leonard couldn't help but grin. He had done it, on his own this time. When he stepped out of the plane, Mr. Reynolds greeted him with a firm handshake. Excellent work, Leonard. You've got the makings of a great pilot. Thanks, Mr. Reynolds, Leonard said, his chest swelling with pride. For the first time, he felt like he truly belonged in the cockpit. The final day of flight camp arrived, marked by a small graduation ceremony at the airfield. The campers gathered in the main hangar, where instructors handed out certificates and shared encouraging words about the students' progress. Leonard stood among his peers, clutching his certificate tightly. His name was called, and he stepped forward to a round of applause. Leonard Thompson, Mr. Reynolds said, smiling as he handed Leonard the certificate. Your passion and skill for flying are undeniable. You've shown composure and talent far beyond your years. We can't wait to see where your journey takes you. As Leonard returned to his seat, Rachel stood at the back of the room, beaming with pride. After the ceremony, she wrapped her arms around him. I'm so proud of you, Leo, she said. Thanks, Mom, Leonard replied, his voice tinged with emotion. This was the best experience of my life. As the campers said their goodbyes, Leonard exchanged contact information with several of them, promising to keep in touch. They had shared more than just a camp experience. They had built a community. Back home, Leonard returned to his daily routine, but the camp experience stayed with him. His simulator practice took on new meaning now that he had flown real planes. He felt more confident, more capable, and more determined than ever. One afternoon, Rachel handed him a large envelope that had arrived in the mail. The return address bore the name of a regional flight school. Leonard's hands trembled as he opened the envelope. Inside was a letter offering him a scholarship for a youth aviation program designed to guide aspiring pilots toward earning their private pilot license. They're giving me a scholarship, Leonard said, his voice barely above a whisper. I can start real flight training. Rachel's eyes filled with tears. Leo, this is amazing. I knew your hard work would pay off. Leonard stared at the letter, his heart racing. The scholarship wasn't just an opportunity. It was a step closer to his dream of becoming a professional pilot. He immediately called Captain Marcus Taylor to share the news. That's fantastic, Leonard, Taylor said. If you need any advice or help, you know where to find me. Over the next few weeks, Leonard prepared for his new training program. He studied tirelessly, devouring every aviation book and video he could find. The skies were no longer just a dream. They were becoming his reality. The first day of Leonard's youth aviation program felt like stepping into a whole new world. The regional flight school was larger than he'd imagined, with a fleet of planes ranging from small trainers to more advanced aircraft. The facility buzzed with activity. students in uniforms reviewing charts, instructors holding pre-flight briefings, and the faint roar of engines in the distance. Leonard was assigned an instructor named Ms. Caldwell, a veteran pilot with decades of experience and a no-nonsense attitude. "Welcome to your first day of real flight training," she said, her sharp eyes scanning him. "Flying isn't just about passion. It's about discipline and precision. Think you're ready for that?" "Yes, ma'am," Leonard replied, his voice steady. "Good," Miss Caldwell said with a nod. "Let's start with the basics. Every good pilot knows the plane inside and out, so we'll begin with a detailed pre-flight inspection." Leonard followed her to a small Cessna 152, his excitement growing with every step. Over the next hour, Miss Caldwell walked him through every part of the aircraft, from the fuel tanks to the control surfaces. "Pay attention to these inspections," she said. "A thorough pre-flight check can save lives." When they finally got airborne, Leonard felt a familiar rush of joy. But this time, the training was more rigorous. Ms. Caldwell drilled him on precise maneuvers, emergency procedures, and proper communication with air traffic control. "You've got potential, Leonard," she said after their first session. "But potential only gets you so far. Hard work will take you the rest of the way." Leonard nodded, ready to prove himself. Weeks turned into months, and Leonard's skills continued to grow. He mastered complex maneuvers, learned to navigate in various weather conditions, and gained a deeper understanding of aviation safety. With each flight, his confidence soared higher. One crisp autumn morning, Leonard completed his first solo flight. It was a moment of pure exhilaration. Taking off, circling the airfield, and landing all on his own. As his wheels touched down, he felt an overwhelming sense of accomplishment. When he stepped out of the plane, Miss Caldwell greeted him with a rare smile. "Congratulations, Leonard. That was flawless." Rachel was waiting nearby, tears of pride streaming down her face. "You did it, Leo," she exclaimed, pulling him into a hug. That evening, Leonard sat by his bedroom window, looking up at the stars. The glow-in-the-dark decals on his ceiling had faded over time, but the real stars outside seemed brighter than ever. "I'm going to do it, Mom," he said as Rachel sat beside him. "One day, I'll be flying those big jets, just like I've always dreamed." Rachel smiled, her hand resting on his shoulder. "I know you will, Leo, and I'll be right there cheering you on." As Leonard stared at the sky, he felt a profound sense of clarity. His journey wasn't over, it was just beginning. The plane he had once saved was only the start of a lifetime in the skies. He wasn't just chasing a dream anymore, he was living it. Enjoy the story. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. Share your thoughts in the comments and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next thrilling episode. See you in our next video. Take care